Dr. Seyfried, it's such an honor to have you here. I know my listeners and followers are going to learn a ton from this episode, and it's one of those topics that I wish I could just go and make everybody listen to because it's so important. And I followed your work for a really long time. I'm a big fan of it. I know in my community to really highlight the work that you've done. So I would love for you to start with just telling the listeners how you got so interested in looking at cancer as a metabolic disease. You wrote your book on it. You have over 200 publications on it. We really need to get this message, this information, education out to the masses. And there's a lot of roadblocks to that. So just tell us how you got so interested in this topic.
Well, thank you, Shanna. It's nice to be here and tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing in our attempt to manage cancer. But we've been working on this for 40 years. I started at Yale University when I was an assistant professor there in neurology. And most of us were working on epilepsy. And of course, I've done a large amount of work on mapping genes for epilepsy. And at the same time, we were doing a lot of biochemistry on brain biochemistry related to not only epilepsy, but various other disorders, and including brain tumors. But it was pure basic research. You isolate and purify lipids from tumor tissue, comparing mouse brain tumors with human brain tumors. I had access to human tissue from my colleagues that worked in neurosurgery, and I had developed a number of models of brain cancer in mice that we were trying to figure out what the similarities would be in the lipid composition of mouse and human brain tumors to see whether or not we could develop good models and just basic science stuff. And we didn't start getting into metabolic management of cancer until we noticed that we had overlapping studies of epilepsy and brain tumor biochemistry in the lab. Then when I left Yale, I came to BC, Boston College, and now we've been doing that for a long time. But we noticed that in epilepsy, calorie restriction and ketogenic diets are a well-known way to manage epileptic seizures. And we were seeing such powerful effects of calorie restriction and restricted ketogenic diets for managing epilepsy. And very interesting that we were doing work on brain cancer, of course, but we weren't using any metabolic approaches. But then some person, we had some drugs that we were supported by a company. We gave this lipid inhibitor drug to some of our brain cancer mice, and we noticed that it really had a powerful effect in shrinking the brain tumors in the mice. And the company got very excited about this. And so we did furthermore studies, and then we realized that you got to be very careful. Sometimes drugs change the food intake of the animal. So we didn't know at the time. We thought this drug was really exciting as a brain cancer reducing drug, until we put in the appropriate control experiments where we fed the mice. We maintained the body weight of the control mice with the same as the experimental mice. Turned out that this drug, the mice kept eating food, but they were losing body weight. And we didn't know if we were all excited. We thought the drug was targeting a specific pathway in lipid synthesis. And then when we put in the control group was just restrict the food of the mice, so the body weight of the control mice not getting the drug was the same as the body weight of the mice that got the drug. And we found out, surprisingly, that the tumor shrunk to the exact same degree. So it had nothing to do with the drug, which was very disturbing to the company that had supported us. So I said, what the hell is going on with this? This is like an eye opener for us because we had been doing calorie restriction in epilepsy. And we knew that calorie restriction in epilepsy was working by lowering blood sugar. And kids that go on ketogenic diets that are managed with their epilepsy invariably have low, steady blood sugar levels. And then we said, well, this cancer drug it was interesting what was happening. The mice were eating food, but they were losing weight. The problem is the drug blocked the ability of the sucrases in your digestive system from generating. The mouse were eating food, but they couldn't break it down for energy, and their blood sugar was going down. So it was the same as what was going on with the epilepsy. And I said, oh my God. And then I said, and it was blocking blood vessels, was doing all these great things to shrink tumors. And then I said, did anyone ever notice this before? And then I looked at Otto Warburg had claimed a long time ago that the tumors need glucose to grow. So I said, well, there's the linkage right there. And then we did a whole bunch of other studies proving, without a question of a doubt, that the amount of blood sugar was directly related to how fast the tumors would grow. So the lower the sugar, the slower the tumor would grow. And then we started seeing human studies, case reports and things in colon, breast, brain, all these different cancers. After we did our work, we started to see people measuring blood sugar, and invariably it was always associated. The lower the sugar, the slower the tumor would grow. And people that would have high blood sugar with cancer invariably had a much worse outcome. Mm-hmm. So people were dying faster with the high blood sugar. So then we began to look at the mechanisms by which lowering sugar could stop tumor growth. And we found, based on Otto Warburg's study, that tumor cells require fermentation through glycolysis using sugar, and that if you lower the blood sugar, you simply shut down the ability of the tumors to generate energy and metabolites for their growth. And there had been a huge controversy in the cancer field about this observation. A lot of misinformation, misunderstanding. We have cleared up all of the major problems associated with Warburg's hypothesis on cancer. Number one, he did not know that there was a second major fuel that we have discovered that can be used for fermentation, which is glutamine, the amino acid glutamine. And it's very hard to use diet to lower glutamine. You can easily lower glucose with diet, but it's very hard to do it for glutamine, except heavy exercise that will do it. But we now have recognized that all cancer is a simple disease dependent on fermentation metabolism. They can't grow without glucose and glutamine, and they can't use ketones or fatty acids to replace glucose or glutamine. So now this represents a very a novel, simplistic, and approachable way to manage the majority of cancers in people. The science is rock solid between myself and Warburg and several other folks in the field. It becomes clear, and we have interrogated these cancer cells trying to find any fuels that could replace glucose and glutamine, and we haven't found any. So it's clear the Achilles heel for this disease is a fermentation metabolism. And if you just deprive the whole body of these fermentable fuels, you will target and eliminate and manage the majority of cancers without toxicity. Now, of course, what I just said is just unacceptable to a system that is currently in place.
Hence the problem. Yeah, it's interesting because when I was a senior in college in the dietetics program, I was so interested in the ketogenic diet and how it worked. And it was this was 25 years ago. But I don't think a lot has changed. Like at that time, the only thing it was being used for children with epilepsy. And that was the base, that was all of the research that I was finding and what I did my paper on. But yeah, it's used for so many other things now. And the findings, when you say like cancer is a simple disease, people are probably like, what? Like cancer is so complicated and there's so many different types and there's all these genetic mutations. But Yeah, as you alluded to, the problem is we're treating it as a genetic disease rather than a metabolic disease. And that just, rather than keeping it simple and treating it in a lot more simple manner, it's just exploded into this, massive money generating
Yeah,
field.
well, and as you said, and the problem is right now, if you go to the National Cancer Institute website, NCI, National Cancer Institute, and you look at their page and they say, what is cancer? And they say cancer is a genetic disease. The National Health Institute in England, in the UK, United Kingdom, is the same. And you hear precision medicine, personalized therapies. This is all based on cancer as being a genetic disease. And if cancer is not a genetic disease, but a mitochondrial metabolic disease, then you're never going to achieve the type of progress that you would have expected, considering you're putting so much effort into this event. And even at the national level, when President Obama chose to call the Moonshot Project, which at that time Joe Biden was the vice president. His job was to oversee the Moonshot Project. And now, as president, he's resurrected this Moonshot, which is $100 million for cancer research and immunotherapies. And immunotherapy is based on the somatic mutation theory that cancer is a genetic disease. Not to say that the new precision medicines don't work. They do. For some people, they work really, really well. But for other folks, it will kill them faster than the tumor. And for a lot of folks, it doesn't have any impact. In knowledge, if we know that cancer cells can't live without glucose and glutamine, it seems to me to be the most logical way is just deprive the cell of the glucose and glutamine. And if you don't kill them all doing this, you may need perhaps some precision tool to go in and finish off the survivors. But you wouldn't use that tool at the beginning because of the differences. Yes, all the cells in a given tumor have a whole different array of genetic mutations. They're not all the same. In fact, almost every single cell in the tumor is a different genetic entity. But every cell in that tumor depends on glucose and glutamine to survive. So you can actually decimate the majority of tumor cells with metabolic therapy, and then perhaps come in with what we call certain parts of the standard of care to finish off this, and your body gets much healthier. We published the press pulse concept of how we slowly degrade tumors while enhancing the health and vitality of the rest of the body. So because we found that many folks that have cancer also have other comorbidities like diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure and hypertension and all these kinds of things. They all interfere with how effective a therapy would be. So our press pulse concept is we slowly degrade tumor while we're bringing the whole body back into a state of health. And this will be the new standard of care for cancer once people realize how it works and the concepts behind it. And then at the very end, if we can't completely resolve the disease, we can certainly bring to bear parts of the standard of care that may now have much greater power to kill off a few cells in a very healthy body than in trying to attack a giant aggressive tumor with a therapy that could also harm the body at the same time you're trying to and not take care of some of the other comorbidities. So the whole strategy of how we're going to deal with cancer will change. It has to, because right now in the United States, we have almost 1,700 people a day dying from cancer. And breast cancer has now replaced heart disease as the #1 killer of women over 40 years of age. So clearly, we're not making any major progress in managing cancer because the underlying theory is incorrect. It's a metabolic disorder. Once you realize that, you're going to see the death rate drop significantly. So it's just a matter of time before this happens.
Yeah, it's maddening that it's not the standard of care now, knowing what's been uncovered. And many of my listeners know my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in August, just like 4 or 5 months ago. And we're living this right now. And the first thing they wanted to do, because it was non-surgical, it had spread. She had cirrhosis of the liver also, so that just exacerbates a lot of things. But she also had like a small tumor in her back that they wanted to radiate. And I started going with her to her appointments, knowing, your research and other books that I've read, other metabolic cancer specialists that I've followed. And the first thing they wanted to do was the genetic testing. And I have two sisters and they're like, this is more for your daughters than anyone else. I'm like, well, I'm not changing my lifestyle based on whatever outcome you find. So it was just kind of crazy. And then she's, in the thralls of chemotherapy, and, I'm trying to get her research, but it's such a fast-paced system. I mean, she was in chemo within weeks, and we had, we were going to do the ketogenic diet and some fasting strategies around her chemotherapy. And I think she did it for the first session. And then the chemo just annihilated her so much and brought her immune system down, her function down so much that it's like her brain is shot, her memories, like she can barely walk. And now she's been through 5 rounds. And I just think, oh, if we could go back and do this all over again. And I had given her your work. It's just unfortunate that now, like, her body is so depleted that, I don't even know where the therapies should go from here. But yeah, I'd like to go back and talk about how you and your team have found that cancer feeds off glucose and glutamine being an amino acid. And we know that we can bring the glucose way down with diet, the ketogenic diet, and glutamine. Like you said, that's a little trickier. I mean, that's amino acid that's found in so many foods. And so many other systems use that. And it's not like you can just, completely deplete the glutamine. So, and you talked about your pulse therapy. So is the idea of just getting people started with the therapies that you found, like getting them into nutritional ketosis, low glucose, and then you're doing the pulse therapies for the glutamine. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you're understanding that right. So that's what we do. We try to get and people say, where are the clinics to do this? And the fact is there aren't very many. You can't, you're not allowed to do this. Okay. So let's be clear about that. This has to become the new standard of care, but the problem is it's not. And they get angry when you bring this to their attention. But you're right. To target glutamine, now you can target glutamine. Glutamine is considered a non-essential amino acid, mainly because the body can synthesize it from sugar, from glucose. You can synthesize glutamine from glucose. It is the most abundant amino acid in our bloodstream. So if you were to go and have an amino acid analysis of your blood, glutamine would be the #1 amino acid in the blood. Glutamine is essential for the urea cycle. Glutamine is an essential metabolite for our immune system. Glutamine is an essential metabolite for the health and function of our gut. So you need this amino acid, even though they call it a non-essential amino acid, it is absolutely essential for certain physiological systems. But there is no food that you can eat that would deprive you of glutamine. Okay, period. Glutamine, if you don't, your body's going to make it from sugar anyway. But if we found is water only fasting with exercise will lower blood glutamine levels. You can lower your blood glutamine levels down to a significant degree. Is it low enough to completely deprive the tumor cell, which is an essential it's essential for that cell? You got to be careful with it. And this is that's why we pulsing. The pulsing concept means that you just hit it briefly for certain periods of time to just kill off the tumor cells gradually. deprive them. So if they're already choked on the glucose side, then you can pulse them on the glutamine side and gradually degrade them slower than you would normally, while maintaining the health and vitality of your body. Now, it is true that some people who do long-term water-only fasting, like Guy Tannenbaum, and I'm getting reports back from several folks who told me that whatever different kinds of cancers they have had completely disappear after long-term repeated water-only fasting and exercise and this kind of thing. And that really powers the body. The body will turn on the tumor cells and use them as food. When you don't eat a lot of food, the body goes through an incredible internal surveillance system where every cell in the body now has to carry its own weight and be productive for the good of the whole. The whole society of cells, all organ systems in the body must be operational at the highest level of efficiency. Tumor cells are not. They're massively inefficient. They're consumers of energy in a very inefficient way. So when the surveillance system comes, when you put your body under these restricted conditions, internally they'll go after those tumor cells and destroy them and eat them and just redistribute the fuel in the membranes of the tumor cells for the rest of the body. So, but you have to get into that zone before that happens. And what we find, though, is when some folks are given standards of care, whether it's chemo or radiation, blood sugar goes up through the roof. So the body is making, when you put your body in stress, emotional or physical stress, corticosteroids go up. It's a flight kind of a thing. And that's not good for cancer. So what part of the press pulse therapeutic strategy is stress management as well. Not only are we depriving the fuels by diet and potentially small drugs that we use to target glutamine, but we also reduce emotional stress as part of the overall ability for the body to heal itself. So all of that plays a role. And right now the most powerful drug for glutamine targeting is 6-deoxynorlucine, DON. It's been used in the research community for years. It was used on cancer patients years ago. They said it was too toxic because they gave too high of a dosages under wrong conditions without targeting glucose and not knowing how to use the tool they had. They had a powerful tool and they didn't know how to use it. So they took it off the market and they gave it to little kids and other cancer patients and things. And some people responded really well. But now we know how to use that tool. And that drug should be absolutely a part of the cancer therapy cocktail of treatments, but it's not. And if you try to get it on compassionate use, the bureaucracy is just very, very difficult. You got to get state paperwork. You got to get federal paperwork. It's like, oh, people can say, oh, we're going to have, compassionate use. But it's not easy to go through the bureaucracy to get. It's crazy because here's a drug that would have, when used in the right way, could have massive therapeutic benefits. The problem is that when off patent, nobody can make a buck on it.
Yeah.
And so you're left with that. So we have to sacrifice all these poor cancer patients because there's a drug available that they can't get. And it's tragic on all levels. And there are companies now that are trying to, tweak the structure of that molecule so that they can patent it and make a lot of money on it. But it's going to be the same drug no matter how you look at it. The bottom line, it looks just like glutamine. It's a very similar structure to the amino acid glutamine. It just blocks the ability of the enzymes to use glutamine as an energy source. So you're really starving. You just block the machinery by which the tumor cell can use the glutamine. And then you strangle it with no glucose, and the drug diet combo just really demolishes. What we just have a paper now we've submitted on childhood high-grade glioma. This is the #1 killer of little kids, high-grade glioma, brain cancer. Little kid die from these horrible brain cancers, and they're irradiated and poisoned. And most of them, even if they survive, they have brain damage from the treatments. But we have we developed a new model of pediatric high-grade glioma, and we used diet drug cocktails and just had, man, just such incredible improvement in how long the mouse models can live. And we say this would be a blockbuster in pediatric glioma. Can't use it. Can't use it because it's not part of the standard of care. And I'm sure there's going to be some parents out there who have little kids. They're destined to be dead or severely brain damaged as the result of these treatments when we have a strategy already in place. Now, all of the stuff that we have come to know that works comes from our preclinical studies here at Boston College. I've developed the best models for testing cancer. And we know they work so much better in people than they work in the mice. I can tell you that right now. We have never achieved complete resolution of cancer in our preclinical models. Now, all of our preclinical models are natural to that organism, but we're shocked when those are translated into the human clinic and how well humans do so much better on these metabolic therapies than do the mice. So clearly, when I say that we see powerful effect in our preclinical system, we know for a fact that will have even more powerful effect as soon as you use it in the clinic, because we've seen this over and over again. So we've never cured a mouse with a ketogenic diet or calorie restriction, but humans are reporting to me over and over again complete resolution in their cancer from these long-term water-only fasts. We never saw that in a mouse, but we were able to use that to show in the humans because we were getting remarkable improvement, but not resolution. But we see more resolution in the human. It's just that kind of a connection.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting and important point to note, and just to let that sink in for the listeners, that a lot of times it's not so much eradicating all the cancer. I mean, we all have cancer cells, but just learning how to maybe live with the cancer that you have and not letting it progress and not letting it take your quality of life, but more so, just having better outcomes and longer longevity than you would if you would have undergone the standard of care that is maddening right now. And I know, going back to the glucose part of things too, when I went to one of my mom's appointments with her oncologist was a younger female. So I thought maybe she would be a little bit more progressive. But when I brought up the fact that we were going to do some ketogenic diets and fasting around chemotherapy, I should have never said that, because then she was all on guard right away. And she said, I want you to know that cancer feeding off of sugar is a myth. That's what she said to my mom, like directly, that is a myth, that it's not true. I don't want you fasting around your treatments. We just need to, keep your weight up. This is what they tell all the cancer patients, keep your weight up and, not lose any weight. And then they sent her home with a bag of Ensure instead. And I was like, oh, I can't.
We call that medical malpractice.
Yeah, it should be.
Medical malpractice. Those folks should be reprimanded. It's just the opposite of what you would do. That's the problem is that young woman, and most of them are simply not trained. They have no clue about the disorder they're treating. They have no understanding of the biology. They don't read the scientific literature. They're just indoctrinated to do this based on their training. So it's really one of the great, I say it's the greatest tragedy in the history of medicine, that you would have so many trained professionals who have little, if any, knowledge about the disorder that they're working with. It's really scary for the cancer patient because they look to these folks as helpers to facilitate. And what they're essentially doing is in so many ways killing them. And why do you think we have 1,700 people a day dying from cancer? This is not insignificant.
Right.
It's overtaking heart disease throughout the world as the #1 killer of people. Mm-hmm. And if you go anywhere in the world, that response that oncologist gave to you is standard response almost everywhere in the world. There's an example. You had a 350-pound person they were afraid he might lose body weight if he did fasting with cancer. I mean, what the hell is going on with that? I mean, it's like nuts. So, and it's scary, and it's a tragedy. I call it a great medical tragedy that so few of the oncologists know anything about the biology of the disease they're treating.
Right, right.
So that's scary. That
Yeah.
is absolutely a scary situation.
And it just undermined anything that I had taught her, or, it's like, what does your daughter, the metabolic nutrition specialist, know about cancer? It's like, of course you're going to want to listen to the oncologist and the doctors with years of training. And so, yeah, it's just so
Well, the other thing too, you have to realize that people say, well, we have millions of so-called cancer survivors, so they must know something about what they do. And the answer is that's true. But many of those cancer survivors pay a significant price
yeah.
for their viability. They have many other comorbidities and abnormalities as for the fact that they were able to survive toxic poisoning and treatments with neuropsychiatric problems, digestive problems, hormonal problems, bone density problems, all these other health issues that will, in the long term, reduce their overall survival on the planet and quality of life. Now, metabolic therapy is designed to not only degrade the tumor, but also increase the health and vitality of the rest of the body. It's a win-win situation. The problem is very few folks understand it. If the National Cancer Institute is telling people that cancer is a genetic disease, well, obviously they must know what they're talking about. They've awarded several Nobel Prizes to folks that have contributed to this mindset that cancer is a genetic disease. We're not saying that, of course, there's mutations in cancer, but they all come as the result of the disturbed energy metabolism. They're an effect, they're not the cause. So the field is chasing effects and trying to manage the disease by targeting effects rather than the underlying driver of the whole dysregulated growth. And that's the fuels, these fermentation fuels are driving the dysregulated growth. And yeah, you can incinerate the whole tissue. And yes, you can poison the whole body with these treatments. Every time I see a bald-headed cancer patient, I say that person was treated by someone who has no clue what's going on, because you're trying to eliminate cancer cells. Why should you go bald? Do the cancer cells exist in your hair follicles? No. So bald-headed cancer patients are the obvious signs that the field doesn't know what cancer is. I mean, it's really terrible when you think about it. And and those who do metabolic therapy, like Maggie and Brad Jones, who put out the movie The Cancer Revolution based on our stuff, are collecting more and more of these stage 4 cancer patients from all different kinds of cancers, and they're still alive far longer than they would have been expected had they done standard of care. Now, some of them do standard of care with metabolic therapy, but most of them do metabolic therapy alone or it's in combination. But the bottom line is that it's working. And how many tens of thousands of success stories do we need before the system changes the standard of care or modifies it? The current standard of care for cancer should not be written in granite. And physicians should not fear losing their license if they decide to modify the standard of care. So the system has created a situation that does not allow for alternative approaches. We also must be careful about people claiming that they do and understand metabolic therapy and then don't do it, or do it in the wrong way, or push nonsensical things that have no relevance. We are writing the standard of care for metabolic therapy right now with my physician colleagues. And once we can publish that, that'll be the guidelines by which we can manage most of these cancers very effectively without the collateral damage that that we're seeing now. So it's just a matter of time. It'll change. The whole system is going to, it's in the process now, slowly changing. But you have to deal with an entrenched system that is both at the industrial, it's at the academic level, research grants awarded to all these scientists at medical schools studying mutations in cancer, the pharmaceutical industries that are making massive amounts of money on these drugs, and also the hospital systems that generate the revenue. It's an entire academic, pharmaceutical, industrial complex that's standing in the way of transitioning away from what we're doing to this new approach to deal with cancer as a metabolic disorder. So you see all the problems that
absolutely. See them in the nutrition fields. Like when you see what you're up against sometimes and you go into a grocery store, it's so disheartening, but you're like, nope, you just got to keep moving on and keep.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, it's a struggle. And the other thing that people should know, and I think we have organizations for breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, and they all make it seem like they're all different. We should raise money for breast cancer, colon cancer, brain cancer, and all this. These are all very similar. Yeah. The tribes need to unite. Cancer is a singular disorder of energy metabolism. It just looks a little different if it's in the brain, the lung, the bladder, the colon, the breast, but it's all the cells are doing the same thing. They're all fermenting. So that's what I call it, a very simple disease driven by fermentation metabolism, which is too radical for people to accept, even though the science is rock solid to support what I'm saying. It's just too simple. It can't be that simple. Let's put it that way.
That was my exact thought. Like it's just way too simple for them to acknowledge.
Okay, you want to say, okay, then do a water-only fast with some embendazole. Follow our press pulse therapy, and you'll see how powerful it is. And then you'll realize how it's not that complicated. If you want to get down into the minutia of the signaling cascades that are going on inside these cells, I mean, you can make a simple situation massively complicated. But our goal is just kill tumor cells without toxicity.
Yeah, as it should be. Well, let's talk about the accessibility and the affordability of the metabolic solutions and the metabolic approach. Obviously, the nutrition part, anybody can do. You have to have buy-in from the patient, which is really tough. It's like they have to be all in. But if somebody wanted to do like the press pulse, where would they even go? You said that only a few people are doing it, and not everyone is doing it correctly. Like,
yep. Well, that's the thing right
now. Like, what can they do?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, and this is the great blowback that I get from all these YouTubes. This guy talks the talk, but where do we go? That's your problem. I've given you the roadmap. I've given you the light. It's your job to go out and make these changes. I'm not a physician. I'm not going to go out and set up 100 clinics to do metabolic therapy. The system, the government, the industry should be doing that. I mean, we've told people what they need to do to get this, put the train back on the track, and then you say, well, there's no clinics. Well, go to your damn congressman. Tell them we want clinics for metabolic therapy, for crying out loud. I mean, this is a people thing. You want to live? You better start thinking about this. March on Washington, for crying out loud. I mean, or rally the tribe. All these different cancer groups should all get together as a single cancer organization and say, we want metabolic therapy. We're tired of toxic drugs killing us, causing not only physical toxicity, but financial toxicity. Mm-hmm. So many families are going broke. Their marriages are falling apart. People are committing suicide on occasions because they have no money. Their whole financial system has been destroyed by paying for drugs that don't work. I mean, this is tragedy in every level. It's just a tragedy. So unless it's not going to change at all, the guys at the top medical schools are not going to change their plan until the people demand it. So, and what I'm saying, yes, people can put the burden of this on you. People can do a lot of this, but if I were to get cancer, I would talk to my friends about it. You like to talk to somebody and know you're on the right path. We developed the glucose ketone index calculator to allow people to know when they get into the what we call the zone of nutritional therapeutic ketosis, And that's a first step. And that's going to be required. The patient has to be a participant in their own healthcare. So it's not just, relying on some physician. The patient has to work with the oncologist together as a team to work. What's your GKI? Once your GKI, glucose ketone index, is low, and they say, what do you have to eat to do that? I don't know. Everybody's different. You could eat a Mediterranean diet. You could eat a ketogenic diet. You could eat a pescatarian diet, a vegan diet, whatever you can bring to bring your GKI down. And I know that people who don't have cancer can bring these zones down much easier than people with cancer. So clearly, having and that's because of the emotional stress. Sometimes that's due to the treatments they're given. Raising blood sugar makes it extremely difficult to get down into the zone if you're being treated with drugs that actually prevent you from getting into the zone. So again, the patient has to bear considerable responsibility. But what they need to do is they have a meter. You can look at the numbers, push the button, and tell you exactly how far you are from the nutritional zone. People tell me, oh, I've done this diet, I can't get into the zone. And it can be hard. But all I know is that if I hate water only fasting, it's tough to do. But in our press pulse, if you go low or zero carb diet for 10 or 15 days, your body slowly adjusts to this new reality. You can make sugar from within the body, but it's very low, but it's necessary. But once you get in, then you can step walk into a water only fast, and then you hit them with the glutamine targeting drugs. And then so the body is so primed and so the tumor cells are so susceptible now to even minute doses of some of these drugs. So they'll up and die quick because they're already on the threshold of death. And you can push them over the edge much easier once your body is into this new zone. And for oncologists to tell you what you were told is just absolutely incorrect information. So you have to realize, this is now the cancer patient they're almost as clueless as the physician that's treating them. And as a matter of fact, now we're starting to see many of the patients know better what should be done than the oncologist treating them. Right. So, I mean, this is now
absolutely true.
Yeah, so because they're listening, but you see, there's a lot of misinformation. Mm-hmm. Everything that I'm saying, I have written and published. So if people want to get into more of the nitty-gritty of what I'm saying, just put my name into Google and ask to see my publications. Okay, so I can't go into all the minutia of what I'm telling you, but I have it in those papers. You want to read the press pulse paper that we published. Okay, read these papers. Oh, he didn't say this, he didn't say that. Well, read the damn papers and then you get the information. Well, I can't read well, then have somebody interpret it for you. The issue is if people want to stay alive, they better start thinking about this, because the other route may not be, the outcome may not be what they think.
Yeah, I know. And so my mom's through her chemo rounds, but now they're going to some pills that, and I don't even know what they are, but she was all worried. Like you said, like the stress and the emotional part of it is huge too. Yeah. And how, friends and family are also, kind of pulled into the situation, but those pills, she's on Medicare, of course, but her copay for the pills was $3,500 a month. The copay. I was like, what? How would any, and there's no way she was affording, they were affording that. They're retired. And so, of course, there was some forms that they had to sign and some loopholes to jump through, and then it got approved. But it's like, well, who's paying for that ultimately? We know who's paying for that. It's everybody, paying to the system. So it is just such a racket.
Oh, I know it is. And, but it's unfortunate, it doesn't have to be that way. And, it doesn't have to be that way. And this is what I'm talking about, the financial toxicity. And, some folks have no insurance and it's devastating. And then they'll tell you, oh, if you don't take these pills, you're going to die. Yep. And they use scare tactics, but not all of them. Now, I don't want to say, because I have a lot of good friends that are oncologists, and they their attitude is the best of what is the best for the patient, but they wish they had been trained in medical school to know about this. and then a lot of them become defensive when you approach them. The key that every cancer patient should ask their oncologist, number one, how is the treatment you are giving me going to restrict the availability of glucose and glutamine to my tumor? The only two fuels that we know that can that the tumor needs to grow. Okay, it's just ask them how is it, and if they look like a deer in the headlight, you'll know that this guy's clueless. He has no clue. Now, of course, he can give you radiation and toxic poisons that will kill cancer cells, but of course, you're going to pay a serious physical and a price for this, and may even kill you. So you have to be aware of that, and that's why they always say, is the treatment curative or palliative? Those terms are extremely important, because if it's palliative, they're only giving you stuff to keep you alive a little bit longer. Yeah. Curative is different. We're trying to cure your cancer. Whether we're successful or not, we don't know. But palliative means we're never going to cure it. We're just pushing you alive a little longer, if we can do it in a miserable state of existence. So people need to know the terminologies that are used when they go into deal with these situations. And a lot of people are just saying, no, thanks, I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Go to Maggie and Brad Jones. They're collecting.
Yes, I have them on my list to interview as well. Going back to the glucose part of it, because that's just the stuff, like I love the nutrition part of it, and helping people in that way. But we obviously need a certain level of glucose for survival. I mean, if you check your glucose at even if it's really low, probably in the 50s or 60s, and people are probably wondering, well, if I'm bringing my nutrition, I'm getting into nutritional ketosis, we're obviously using ketone bodies from fatty acid oxidation for our fuel rather than glucose. And I just want people to understand, most cancers are, correct me if I'm wrong, but all cancers, maybe, or most of them, cannot use ketone bodies for fuel, which is why we're getting them into nutritional ketosis. But the rest of the body, the vast majority of the rest of our cells can, in fact, utilize ketone bodies and utilize them very well. But people might be confused about, well, if I always have glucose in my bloodstream, in order to stay alive, why isn't the cancer utilizing that glucose? And from what I understand, the body just kind of downregulates any cell systems that aren't necessary. And then you can target the cancer cells more directly. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you're coming close to this. You're very close. It's not just ketone bodies, it's also fatty acids. And I get so many comments to say, oh, breast cancer can use fatty. No, it can't. How do I know? Because I did the experiments myself. So what we do is we take cancer cells and we take everything away from them, grow them in salt solution, saline, and they die. There's no food. When there's no fuel, they die. Then we add things back and see what keeps them alive. And we add all these different amino acids and different things back, only glucose and glutamine. So if you take cancer cells and remove glucose and glutamine and give them ketone bodies or fatty acids, they die. They can't use ketone bodies or fatty acids. Okay. Now, fatty acids can sometimes, if you give them fatty acids, it uncouples the mitochondria, making them use more glucose and glutamine. So if you have a lot of glucose and glutamine in the environment and you give fatty acids, they could make them use more glucose and glutamine. So if you keep glucose and glutamine low, fatty acids cannot, or ketone bodies cannot do that. Now, the other issue is when you start to lower blood sugar, your body makes ketone bodies, which can replace glucose as a fuel. So the brain is the biggest consumer of sugar in our body, the brain. Okay, but the brain can transition away from sugar to ketone bodies. So we can start to lower. And the best example of this was the work of Drenick. If you want to know how low you can get your blood sugar, your body doesn't need sugar. It can transition away to ketones or fatty acids. Normal cells can burn fatty acids or ketone. Heart burns fatty acids. Okay, heart can burn ketone. Brain burns ketones. All the cells in our body, except erythrocytes, which just require a minimal amount of glucose. So you can bring blood sugar levels down really low. What Drenick did is he took 30 really obese men and fasted them for 21 days and then shot them up with insulin. and brought the blood sugars down to 9 milligrams per deciliter, 0.5 millimolar, which is just barely, you can't find it. And most clinicians said, oh, this guy should be completely dead. They were completely cognitive fine. There was no abnormality in these guys because their body had completely shifted to ketones and fatty acids. They didn't need any glucose. So when you start lowering blood sugar and elevating ketones, you can push glucose down further and further. And what happens then, there becomes a new competition for the available glucose on the part of all of your normal cells. They're burning ketones, but they'll take in that glucose. The cancer cell absolutely has to have that glucose, and it takes it in very inefficiently. So when the rest of the body is now competing for the first time, when the body has a lot of sugar, the body doesn't look at the cancer cell as a problem because the rest of the body has enough fuel. When you start lowering the level, all of a sudden, the normal cells are switching to ketones, and these tumor cells can't make the switch, so they're at a total competitive disadvantage. This is why it's a whole system's physiology to kill the tumor cells. Yeah. So, and it works, it's evolutionarily conserved in our physiology. We evolved as a starved species on this planet. We could go for long periods of time without eating, with the minimal amounts of nutrition. We're omnivorous, meaning that we can eat anything that crawls, walks, or flies on this planet. We can eat to stay alive. Our bodies are perfectly geared for operation under massive nutritional stress. Tumor cells can't, once you put them into that category, they are sitting ducks for the rest of the body, turns on them and eats them. So, but you got to get below a threshold. That threshold comes down, and your rest of the cells get super healthy. You start to have cognitive, you actually are more cognitively equipped. You feel better, you feel stronger, and these tumor cells are getting hammered. Now, this is what I just told you is the solution to the cancer problem. But you have to realize that folks are going to have to know their physiology. They're going to have some level of scientific literacy. This is what I teach in my classes here at Boston College, scientific literacy. You need to know something about how your body works. You need to know about some of these things. And, you know, people say, what about prevention? And I said, people in our country and most people don't care about prevention. Now I'm saying most people, because we have an obesity epidemic. Obesity has replaced smoking as one of the #1 risk factors for cancer. So you think if people really concerned about cancer, you'd have a very minimal level of obese people. The fact that we have a obesity epidemic means people don't care about cancer prevention, period. Yeah. Not that complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to ask you what you thought would be the single most pressing thing to do, to focus on, to avoid cancer in the future, but really it's the whole metabolic health and the metabolic health of the person. And that's all we talk about on this podcast. So it's a compilation of all the things, but I'm curious as you talk about, and then we'll wrap up here. You know, the body or the cancer cells using glucose and glutamine for their fueling source and fermentation. Are there certain cancers that use like primarily glucose or certain cancers that use primarily glutamine? Because I'm just thinking back, like how you said that, you know, the early researchers of cancer and the metabolic disease, they knew about the glucose, but they were missing the glutamine part of it. And certain people can fast a certain amount of time and the cancer seems to disintegrate, or they go on a ketogenic diet and it seems to disintegrate. So are they all kind of using glutamine and glucose at the same rate, or are there certain cancers, or is it just dependent on the person?
Yeah, well, it's all of what you just said, but we've come to realize that the metastatic cancer cell, which is the one that spreads through your body, the one that ultimately is the most challenging, is part of our immune system. It is our immune system gone corrupted, and it is usually a macrophage or some sort of one of these kinds of immune cells that already have the capacity to do this. They're heavily glutamine dependent. So they seem to be more glutamine dependent than glucose dependent. Whereas the rapidly growing stem cells, this is another kind of cancer cell, they seem to be a little bit more glucose dependent than glutamine dependent. So the answer to your question is it depends on the two types of cancer cells, whether they're a rapidly growing cancer stem cell or a metastatic cell. They're all corrupted metabolically. It's just that some are more glucose dependent than glutamine. This is why we don't care. We just assume we don't care because they're all dependent one way or another on glucose and glutamine.
Yeah.
And so we have to take the two out together. And there's no you've closed the front door and the back door of the barn, and now they're trapped. And you just raise the ketones and you burn the barn down on top of them. But you can't just hit glucose. Now, what is interesting though is if you do long-term water-only fasting with exercise, you're actually lowering glucose and glutamine simultaneously. And that was always a phenomenon to me because I didn't know how people could get their cancers resolved by these very long-term fasts. And I'm saying we're not targeting the glutamine with any drug or anything. And yet the tumor cells are dissolved. And that because you're going below these thresholds and you're just putting so much pressure, you're allowing the body to go after the tumor cells for fuel. But you don't do that until you go on these long-term water-only fasts. But you can run those people. I'm not proposing that to do this is everybody should be doing this, because the press pulse strategy allows us to achieve the same goal with making it a little bit easier for folks to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
So again, all this is a work in progress.
Yeah.
And the excitement of the field is going to know how many different ways we can kill cancer cells without toxicity, while enhancing health and not going financially broke doing all this.
Right.
So,
yeah.
you know,
You're talking about the long-term fasting as a strategy, the water-only fasting. And I'm sure it's very dependent on the type of cancer, the person, where they are metabolically, so many different factors. But are we talking like 3-day fasts in a specific time period? Are we talking 5 days, 7 days, or is it just,
well,
highly?
we follow the glucose ketone index, whatever the GKI values are. So people know when you're in 2.0 or below, you're really having low glucose, elevated ketones. So that stage in itself is putting a lot of pressure on the tumor cells. How long you could go in that stage, and we're collecting data now from people all over the world on how their GKIs are going with these things. And again, you have to recognize that there's the healthy patient and the not so healthy patient that's under these kinds of conditions. So the data, we're collecting data, and Pablo Kelly, the brain cancer survivor who used no chemo, no radiation, we had 5 years of glucose ketone index data on this fellow. And he was accurate, he had a little log book, and he was every day recording his blood sugar, sometimes and ketones, sometimes 2 times a day. And we put it all together in the big paper so people can go and they go look and they go, 5 years, this guy 5 years. But most of those people are dead within 2 years with those kinds of tumors, and he's now entering his 10th year of survival.
Yeah.
So you can do it. People love to record numbers.
Yeah.
They get all excited when they see look at my glucose today. It's really
And I follow Pablo's story. It's truly remarkable and amazing. Well, as we close out here, one last question, and that's the prevention of recurrence. If somebody does undergo the metabolic, what you're proposing. We do the diet, we do the pulse press, or if that's not available, you do some, at least the diet part. So prevent the recurrence once somebody gets the cancer under control and manage, and maybe even like in Pablo's case, you're kind of just living with it, but it's not advancing. Are we talking about staying in that level of nutrition?
Well, that's a personal decision.
Okay.
That's a personal decision. You know what you need to do. We've had people fall off the wagon, go back and eat in the big,
Yep. I
some
get that all
sandwiches, have
too.
that pizza. The issue is that we have seen tumors grow faster when
Yeah.
people start elevating their blood sugar. If they're not completely resolved and the cancer is there and you're kind of keeping it at bay, you're not allowing it to get too aggressive. And I don't know. I mean, we haven't been doing this long enough to know how long people can live doing metabolic therapy. So The answer is we don't have enough. We have long-term survivors, but we don't have them that long to
Yeah.
know, certainly beyond their predicted survival for sure, but not to know that, hey, this guy had brain cancer and he died at 98 years old from a heart attack.
Yeah.
We cured a dog. We cured one dog. That's all I can say. I have published that too on mast cell tumor of the dog. It's a very interesting story, also open access. Anybody with dogs are loaded with cancer too. And
Yeah.
they're they're eating the same crap that we eat. And
Yeah.
they have but you can go back and look at what that woman did on metabolic therapy for her dog, who died at 15 years of age from heart failure, but the cancer never returned. So we have a lot of things out there, but so far we haven't had anyone totally cured. I don't want to say the word cure,
Right.
who had cancer like young like you, and then lived to be like 99 years old or 100, just dying from old age, and the cancer never returned. So I would call that, we won't know that until you end your life and say, oh, and the cancer never came back. And you say, oh, then you definitely were cured. But we don't know. You can't know that.
Yeah. And it's the same. It's like I work with tons of diabetics and those with fatty liver. It's like I'm very careful to say, I'm not going to cure your diabetes. We're going to put it in remission. We're going to take all the symptoms away. We're going to get you metabolically healthy and your lab values normalized. But it is a slippery slope to say like cure.
Oh, yeah. I don't like to use the term cure. I like to use the term management.
Yeah.
We can manage the cancer, but how, if we ever cure it or not, I don't know. So I don't want people to say, oh, Seyfried says you can cure cancer. No, I don't.
Right.
I didn't say, you didn't hear me say that. I said we're going to have a better chance to manage the cancer without toxicity. Whether you get cured or not, we won't know until you die from old age from something else.
Yes. This has been such a packed hour, and just so important. So say somebody gets newly diagnosed, everybody knows somebody with cancer, unfortunately, or they will if they haven't yet. Somebody gets newly diagnosed. Tell us where we can find your work. And then I did want to ask you if they could go to like the FLCCC website as a resource to look for some of the alternatives if the approaches that we talked about today aren't available to them.
Yeah, well, I think you'd have to look on the web and look at my papers and talk about whether your I think your general practitioner, what the primary care physician. A primary care physician can walk a lot of these people through the whole process. So you don't need an oncologist all the time, for sure. But for a lot of primary care, because they're in the business of trying to keep you healthy. They're the ones doing the blood work. They're the ones knowing whether you're in a healthy zone or not. So the primary care physician becomes the facilitator of doing this. And we keep going because of most of the research that we have that we're doing is supported by private foundations and philanthropy. So we keep doing the research to improve the overall outcome, the strategies. And as long as we can do that, the field will move forward rapidly. So people should know that they can support Travis Christofferson's Foundation for Metabolic Therapy. He wants to change the terminology to call it metabolic oncology. So there's a new kind of a term coming. So patients can go to their hospitals and say, I'd like to have metabolic oncology. Do you have a metabolic oncologist? And the answer invariably will be no.
Yeah.
But but at least you're putting the word out there. Let people know, hey, this is the hot thing, metabolic oncology, and we're the ones that are trailblazing on this whole thing to improve and make it better. So the more we can test all these different diet drug cocktails and these other conditions, the better off most people with cancer will eventually be.
Yeah. And I like the thought about asking the PCP and bringing them in, getting them involved. Because that's exactly what I told my mom. I'm like, there's all of these.
And what'd you say, the PCP? What's it?
Just bringing them into the care if the oncologist isn't willing to look at some different strategies. But because I know my mom's PCP is much more open-minded and willing to look at research than her.
Yeah. They're the ones. they're the ones, but they sometimes can be a little reluctant because they feel they're stepping on the toes of the
Yeah,
oncologist.
yeah, I know. It's just a
You know,
slippery slope. It's
so
like
you
so
have to be a
messy.
little careful. You have to
Yeah,
be a little careful about that, but you can word it in such a way that you'll allow them to do what they're supposed to be doing, and working it that way. Because the cancer patient can ask the same questions to their primary care as they
absolutely.
could to the oncologist, but they got to make sure that they know the boundaries of their area.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
absolutely.
to tell a cancer patient, you might want to get into nutritional ketosis to help you out. But then again, the oncologists say, no, no, don't ever do that. Drink the
Yeah.
Infamil and have
Drink the Ensure
yeah.
instead. Like at least you're getting some nutrition. And no, and like we were talking, like my mom had fatty liver for decades and she was overweight and they're so worried about her losing. I'm like, Mom, if you lose some fat from what we're trying to accomplish here, like you're going to be healthier than you were before. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's nuts. So I'm so thankful for your work and all of the publications that you're doing and those who you're educating. I mean, we have a long way to go, but but come you've helped bring, things evolve and bring them forward. So we are
Yeah. Well, thank
very,
you.
very
Yeah.
thankful for you and your work. And I hope you continue to do it for a long time.
I'm going to do it until the last breath of my body.
Perfect. I love to hear that. Well, thanks so much for all your knowledge and all you're doing and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thanks, Shannon. Nice to be here.